Okay, I think we're live. I'm sure no one is watching because it's a little past 5 a.m. on the East Coast. In fact, I can hear the birds chirping around this time, which means it's going to be daybreak in a little over an hour. Oh well, there's one person watching, fellow insomniac or early riser. Um, I want to talk a little bit about the whole push, the media generated push behind Andrew Cuomo. So people who've been following the news about what's happening in New York are probably aware of the fact that 1,700 people have died in nursing homes, which exceeds the number of people who've died in the entire state of Florida, I believe. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I think it's somewhere around there. So these are just people who've died from coronavirus in nursing homes, and the numbers are probably larger than that because they've been releasing people from the hospital and forcing nursing homes to admit them. Now, nursing homes at the best of times are negligent and not the best places to recover or to heal. And you're taking these these places that have already already don't have the best facilities. They don't have the best administration. The people there, the patients are not well cared for, and you're forcing them to accept people who are have a highly contagious disease that's lethal to people mostly over a certain age. If you look at the statistics, even in New York, the percentage of people who are dying from COVID are overwhelmingly um, among the elderly, people who are over 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And you have a lot of, I know there was a nursing home um, that I'm aware of that actually had a woman who was over 100 who was staying there. So you have these people who are in very perilous condition in a lot of cases, and you're exposing them to an incredibly deadly virus that's killed and infected tens of thousands of people throughout the country and throughout the world. And Cuomo didn't stop this policy. He basically forced these nursing homes to admit these patients who had COVID. He didn't stop this policy until the other day. Oh, hi. Oh, I guess there are people watching. Um, good morning. Um, he didn't stop this until the other day. So basically, until over 1,000, close to 2,000 people had died because of his deliberate negligence. Um, that he only stopped it because of the media backlash, which it took weeks for this to even develop, for him to start to be pressed by reporters in Albany. Now, you notice that this wasn't the national press. The national press, the DC press, and New York reporters outside of the state capital are lavishing praise on this guy who's directly responsible for thousands of deaths in the state. The subways, they started to be cleaned just this past week. They were taken out of service for the first time in memory and given a deep clean. But this was over 2 months after they had already become homeless encampments. You already had people who were homeless and exposed to or exposing people to exposing essential workers, quote unquote, to to sickness they had been doing this for the past 2 months, and they finally addressed this recently. And yet, you have the National Press Corps lavishing praise on this man, and implicitly positioning him as the replacement for Joe Biden, because Joe Biden is such a hapless candidate, and he is so probably probably one of the worst candidates, um, probably one of the worst Democratic nominees since the just in terms of his incapacity. Um, Probably one of the worst Democratic nominees we've seen. Uh, uh, Cox was pretty bad. The guy who ran against Warren G. Harding, but um, yeah, just in terms of um, fitness for this race, he's probably the worst Democratic nominee we've seen in decades. Good morning, First Corinthians. And that's one of the reasons the media is so keen on promoting Andrew Cuomo. And there's a great Stephen Miller. Um, I'm not a huge fan of Stephen Miller. I'm talking about the journalist, not the White House advisor, but there's a journalist named Stephen Miller who writes for The Spectator. I'm not generally a fan of his, but he wrote a very good piece the other day highlighting, and this is one thing he is good at, highlighting the hypocrisy of the mainstream media, national press organs, and he illustrated how Andrew Cuomo's incompetence, just like Bill de Blasio's incompetence, although on a greater scale since he is the governor of an entire state, how it was responsible directly for these deaths. And yet the media continues to prop him up as a, presumably because they need some fallback option if Joe Biden's pursuit of the nomination completely collapses. There's still a debate here. A judge recently intervened, but there's a debate about whether or not they're holding the New York primary. So it's very likely that Joe Biden might go into the Democratic convention without a majority of delegates. I think that die was pretty much cast before Super Tuesday, but it looks likely that he's not going to go into the convention with majority delegates, particularly if these these primaries, the primary calendar disappears. If more of these states start canceling their primaries, and uh, pursuant to what's going to happen in New York State, we really don't know yet. Hi, Lawrence. Um, so yeah, he's going to go in there in a very weak condition, and Cuomo, just like his father, the media is trying to cast him as some sort of savior for the Democratic Party. And as Stephen Miller points out, this is kind of ridiculous. Even other Democratic governors like Jay Inslee performed more capably. Now, remember, Seattle was where we had one of the first big outbreaks of the coronavirus in a Seattle nursing home, and yet Washington has handled this much more competently than New York. People are trying to frame it as if Andrew Cuomo has behaved capably during this crisis when his actions or inactions and those of De Blasio, who shouldn't even be in office, have actually been responsible for thousands of deaths, thousands of uh, deaths that could have been possibly could have been avoided if they had taken different actions. And it reminds me a little bit of the way that China, despite the fact that China is responsible for deliberately unleashing this virus, they allowed the coronavirus to escape Wuhan, covered it up, uh, dithered for months, possibly, as it escaped containment and traveled throughout the world. They're basically responsible for the deaths that have occurred outside of Wuhan, even if the virus wasn't deliberately made or conceived in a Chinese laboratory, which is still open to question, despite all the people denying that. There's no firm evidence that it didn't come from a lab. We still have no idea where it originated. We do know it originated in China, and it spread from China, and there's no denying their complicity in spreading this virus. And just like there's no denying the fact that Cuomo and De Blasio have acted completely ineptly, and yet Cuomo is being positioned as the savior of the Democratic Party. Anyway, I would recommend reading the Stephen Miller article in the Spectator. It's pretty short, but it's a very good summation of what's happened, and a warning for people who are looking at Andrew Cuomo as a potential uh, ninth inning replacement for sleepy Joe Biden. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, as I always say. And I will see you next time.